Feel official. Jeffrey Hill, welcome to the Astroben podcast. How are you?
I'm doing great, Ben. Thanks for having me.
Well, I'm sure you're probably at a point of the year where the nerves are starting to tick in. I don't know. I know you've been doing satellite for a while, and we're about a few weeks out when this from the satellite show. How are you doing? Is this a particularly busy time?
It's busy, but I'm no longer nervous. The nervous part is around December when we have like half of the program finished, and I'm trying to confirm keynotes and find the big name speakers. At this point, I already have 12 keynotes, and all of my general sessions and attendance is way up. Like, I'm super excited. I'm more or less. I am fearing next year when I have to we have to top this. Like, we're already planning, but I'm already thinking about like, what are we going to do next year? But this year is going to be great. Everybody's going to be there. I mean, I hope the companies do a lot of business and get to network with new people. Like more than 30% of our attendees this year are first-time attendees, and we have big keynotes from non-space companies like John Deere and Delta Airlines. As well as our government military keynotes and some of our industry keynotes. Is really, really exciting. So we're past the scary part. And now it's just making sure we manage all of these like 15,000 people properly.
Absolutely. So for anyone listening who doesn't know, Satellite is one of the world's largest satellite technology events. I mean, the clue's in the name. But it's been going for quite a while now, right? For about 40 years or so, it's been running.
Yes, it's exactly as old as I am. It was started. The very first show was launched by my predecessor, Scott Chase, in a parking garage in the DC area the week I was born, and then I took it over. I took it over about 10 years ago now. But yeah, it has evolved from, at the time, satellite was largely used for broadcast and very select enterprise communication. So anything requiring, direct connection between like two offices for very sensitive information, and also for government and military communications as well. But now it is, it's consumer. It's a full consumer product with things like Starlink. It is all enterprises. I mean, John Deere announced one of the biggest contract awards this year for the commercial satellite industry for Starlink, and in-flight connectivity is all satellite. So you got airlines coming, and now with 5G end-to-end, and the kind of convergence between the terrestrial or like the cellular industry and the satellite industry. It's really just like we have a tech show mindset now. We're not really a satellite show or space show. We are a tech show that fits in with all of the other tech shows.
And you've had the opportunity to interview some prominent figures at previous satellites, and it sounds like you will again this one. Like Elon Musk, Jeff Bezos, Branson. I mean, just to name the obvious ones. What are some memorable moments or insights you've gained from these interactions? Because that's quite a unique position to be in.
Well, yeah, when I took over as chair, we didn't really have keynotes. We did have Elon. The first year I was involved in satellite in 2009, we did have Elon Musk come and give a speech at a lunch, I think on opening day. But this is when they were just first really reaching out to satellite people. So people were, and I was there at the talk, and people were just like, who is this guy? Like, what do you mean launching for 10% or something, or 15% of the cost? So people were like, yeah, startup, let's see if it happens. I mean, this was at a time when there were very few established companies doing all of the business, and launching a satellite was like $500 million in costs across the board. When I took over, I noticed that more and more, privately funded companies were gaining ground. Jeff Bezos' Blue Origin idea was now becoming more public. I remember emailing Ariane Cornell every year at Blue Origin since I started working, saying, "Are you guys ready yet?" And she was like, "Nope, see you next year." And finally, in fact, one of your previous guests, Clay Mowry, made that Jeff Bezos keynote happen. So my idea of taking over is we need to get some big names in the satellite show, because the cellular shows, the other connectivity shows have all these big name CEOs, and if all of these Silicon Valley guys are interested in space, let's get them to like interact with our industry. So we had, like I said, we had Elon in 2009, and I interviewed him a couple of times for the magazine, for Via Satellite magazine, which is associated with our show. It's owned by the same company. And then we had Greg Weiler, who founded OneWeb and O3B. He did a keynote before our opening general session, which was a very traditional, like we had the same 4 operators, satellite operators, on as our big opening general session. And I was like, let's put a big keynote before or after it. And it was like the first time I think we had this sort of like Silicon Valley tech style keynote with a guy with a black t-shirt walking around stage with a mic saying, I'm just going to change the world. And that was the start of OneWeb, like right there on our stage, and which was recently acquired by Eutelsat, but it's the second largest like satellite connectivity constellation up right now. After that, we set this sort of precedent that every year we're going to get this big keynote around the Tuesday opening general session. And, the first one we got was Jeff Bezos. And your former guest, Clay Mowry, helped set that up because he had just left Arianespace and joined Blue Origin. And not only was he going to come, and I was going to sit down and interview him, but he was going to reveal their first commercial customer for the New Glenn. So there was a lot of secrecy around it. But it's really funny what my biggest memories from those interviews weren't the things that we'd said on stage. Like I do remember, like we revealed Eutelsat. It was a big deal. I remember Jeff being nervous on stage. He had cards to make sure he had all the stats right for the rockets. Because I think this is his first time really ever making a business pitch to this audience. I mean, clearly cared about the facts. I remember him he and I got into this conversation about the Washington Post, which he owns. And a few of his writers had been nominated for Pulitzers. And we were talking about the work they had done over the years. And I was surprised by how much he knew about each of these journalists. Like usually, somebody owns a newspaper, we won awards. But he had followed these reporters, pretty closely, and I was impressed by that. And we were talking about what's new in journalism. It was an interesting idea. And then in the middle of this conversation, he's just like, "I'm going to go use the bathroom," and just leave. And he asked me where the bathroom is. I was like, "Oh, you go down out around the hall. It's right around the hall." And we had just finished eating breakfast, and he left, and I just forgot that this is like the richest person in the world. It just slipped my mind. And his security detail comes up and we're like, "Where did he go?" I was like, "Oh, the bathroom." They went into like high alert mode. Like I was like, "What did I do?" And they were like scrambled. And before things got out of hand, he just like walked back in. And he was like, "Yeah, all right, yeah." And I was like, and they were like, "Don't do that. You just gave us a heart attack." I just remember that happening, being like this moment where I was like, sometimes it's good not to be the richest person in the world, because you can't just go to the bathroom. You have to like have a security detail with you. But Jeff was super nice. Probably the most approachable, easy to interview of the space billionaires. I've interviewed Elon Musk several times, and I feel like he's been a completely different person each time I've interviewed him. We've always had good interviews. He gets very deep in thought. The last one we did at Satellite 2020 was the day before, like a couple days before we got shut down because of COVID. And he showed up late. was clearly exhausted. Something was like a bit off. Like it just looked like he was not quite ready for it. And so, if you ever see like a news article where Elon Musk says or does something crazy, they always put this picture of him where he's wearing this leather jacket and he looks like kind of disheveled. I don't know if you've ever seen this photo.
I haven't, but that was then.
But he's like looking up. You see like it's like blue lights in the background. It's that photo is used so much these days. And I am cropped from that photo. I am just off to the right of that photo. So I joke and tell people I'm probably the most cropped out person in photojournalism history. Like that photo was used like billions of times in global media around the world. And it's always for like, Elon Musk said something crazy. Here's this photo of him looking tired. I don't know if it was really like a fair thing, but
That's so interesting.
There's that. And then the other story I think back on for the Richard Branson interview was we did that over live stream because it was Satellite 2021 and there was the pandemic. We had a hybrid live streaming event because there was a lull in cases at the time. We were very fortunate with the timing, but it was still like, we had mask requirements, distance, like everybody was sitting 6 feet apart. And so Richard was doing his interview live from his private island. And we were in the big ballroom, and we were doing our technical run through. And I was sitting there, I was talking to Dan Hart, who was the CEO of Virgin Orbit at the time. And we were just talking about music. He's a drummer. He's a very good drummer. We were just talking about music. And Richard just pops up in the monitor in front of us. It's like, hello, ready to go. Hi, satellite. I'm like, Richard, you're about an hour early. and he's like, oh. And Dan was, trying to joke with him. He clearly, I was like, I'm so sorry if someone gave you the wrong time. Yeah, like we could rehearse now, but we're actually just putting together all the technical stuff to make sure you come through loud and clear. So can you join us again in an hour? And he was like, yeah, all right, sure. And the thing is, he never turned, I don't know if he ever turned the camera off. So we got like this hour of like live feed into like his outdoor, there was like a seating area on his private island. And I was just like, can someone tell Richard to turn his camera off?
You see him like kite surfing in the background.
I was hoping like, it was very boring. I think like he was talking on the phone and reading. And I was like, is this supposed to be on? Can we? So I just remember these like very human moments from those interviews.
Well, that's so funny, and I actually just remembered that I actually asked the question at the Richard Branson one. Virtually, because I wasn't allowed in the US at the time. But I guess it was you that read out the question. So
so you asked the questions. One of the questions we asked.
Yeah.
Oh, cool.
I think it was quite a good question. Well, he said it was a good question. I can't remember what it was. I think it was something about what advice would you give to people wanting to enter the space industry or something like that. I'll put it in the show notes because I put it on my YouTube. But that's really interesting to get those insights. And when you think of those large space conferences, how much of a hook are those big names? Because I know just from my experience, if not just those three, but if some of those big names, the founders, the CEOs are there, it's quite a hook to get non-traditional consumers through the door, or just members of the public that are sort of interested but maybe not in the industry. Do you think that's changed at all, or do you think that that's still a big motivating factor for people looking to go to their first space conference?
Yeah, I mean, for the time that they spoke at the show, it was perfect timing because it was a sign of confidence that there was private investment coming into the space industry. I mean, things would be different now. I mean, Elon Musk, for example, is much more controversial now than he was even a few years ago. Richard Branson has all but exited the industry. I know he's still, supporting Virgin Galactic, but he's made it clear that it's not sustainable for him. You know, and I think Jeff Bezos was maybe taken taken a bit by surprise, the kind of reaction to his flight on the into space, the commercial tourism flight, because the response to that was surprisingly mixed and negative. People were starting to talk about, is space only this like playground for billionaires? So he kind of, since that moment, I noticed he has kind of taken a step back. Blue Origin also had some negative press that was happening around that time. And, but it doesn't have to be those three people. People just want keynotes to raise the confidence level of the industry to saying it's doing well. Like the satellite industry overall is doing very well. And, we can have SpaceX without the controversy because, we have Gwen Shotwell speaking on our opening general session. And Gwen is essentially running the Starlink strategy right now, and she's one of the most talented executives in the country. And, everybody always wants to hear from her. And, to have the FCC chairwoman, Jessica Rosenworcel, speak at Satellite this year, I think is a big deal. We have senior executives from John Deere and from Delta Airlines talking about how satellite is going to bring them into the future. Like, these are moments that are, they're confidence boosters for everybody there, because our audience is made up of a wide variety, a long supply chain across the space and satellite industries, including manufacturers, component manufacturers. And they want to know, was it worth me buying this booth? Am I actually going to sell to people? Is there going to be is the buzz going to be about how the industry is struggling? Or is it going to be about how the industry is growing and there's all these opportunities? And I think we're in store for a real pep rally, because everything I've heard from our keynotes has been about how satellite has never been stronger. Satellite technology has never been in a stronger position than it has been today.
Absolutely. Well, the satellite industry spans obviously a wide range of disciplines and sectors. Mm-hmm. So when it comes to satellite, the conference, how do you balance the diverse interests and priorities of stakeholders? How do you pick a theme for the conference, and how do you sort of build a program around that? Is it something that's sort of been learned over the decades, which is unique to satellite?
Yeah, well, it changes. Like the focus of the show changes depending on, like I said, we get these we sent out a call for proposals in the summer. This past year we received between it was somewhere around 450 to 470 proposals for topics. And it was the most we've ever received for that show by far. These are very highly qualified speakers with well thought out topics. We take a look at that and we kind of get a sense from that of what the industry wants to talk about. And this year was very clear that the show was going to be very connectivity focused. In some past years, the show was more of a hybrid between connectivity and maybe other commercial space services. Some years, in this year, sustainability and efficiency in space operations is still important. But because of the amount of terrestrial and cellular and ISPs and new businesses coming to the satellite show looking for a cheap and affordable way to get into 5G IoT and to enhance customer connectivity services. It really is. It is very connectivity focused. Both of our general sessions feature all satellite operators. And, that was a demand of the industry. Another important factor in putting that program together is our exhibit hall floor. Our exhibit hall floor is mostly component manufacturers, ground systems manufacturers, and antenna technology developers, with a few satellite operators, but anybody who has hardware to sell. And we take that economy into strong consideration because we have to create a conference program that makes sense for the show floor. We don't want there to be this complete disconnect between what we're talking about in the conference and what's going on downstairs. And so for us, a perfect balance is that the people talking upstairs are talking about the same technology that the technology downstairs that we're addressing downstairs, but they're buying it, whereas the people downstairs are selling it. But then the people upstairs are also selling to our government and non-industry attendees who are there for everything. So if we have that cycle, if we have a good balance, then we see that people are in meetings all week and come out with lots of contracts, and that's a big win for us. We really think about this a lot. Like I try to tell people, like I spend 2 months weighing like the most minor detail of the conference program, creating a path for specific attendees, like what makes sense for the airline executive. And I'll spend like a couple of hours on that, and we'll build on that. And like anytime I invite a speaker to a panel, or someone reaches out to us and asks to be on a panel, like I go back to that and saying, are they going to get in front of the people they need to get in front of? Like sometimes people ask, oh, can I have a speaking spot? And I'll say, like, I don't have anything right now, just hold tight. I'm not just ignoring them. I'm like literally trying to find a way where I'm not wasting their time, because I know how people are super busy at the show. So that's the balance we strive for. It is, I think it's like the fun kind of nerdy statistic type work behind an event. But like, since we've been putting in that kind of work, we've done really well, and it helped us get through the pandemic. So
yeah, I wanted to touch on the pandemic because I work in the events industry myself in my day job, and obviously that was a complete rethink of how some people consider events. And there was the assumption that all events would become online because it's cheaper, and you don't have to spend hours and days on a flight and things. But actually, I think it's really bounced back because people have realized that it's not just about the content at these conferences. It's all been in one room. It's the networking, the going out for drinks, having dinners, coffees with your peers. And that's, I guess you can't really you probably don't have much data to that, but what's your kind of gut when it comes to, how important is the conference side and then the extracurricular stuff? Or is it just all sort of meshed together?
Well, we do have data on whether or not people, walk away with important networking contacts. I mean, we do survey businesses, and we do take inventory of meetings that happen on site. I mean, we do all of that stuff. So you asked about the pandemic. This is actually really important for our continued survival when we got shut down in 2020. Our show up rate is almost always like amazing, but like 2020 was like that year where people didn't, like, I think we had 80% of the people we normally have. Not much was known about the pandemic. We didn't even know at that time if it was airborne, like if people could catch it. At the time, people thought it was just you couldn't touch a surface, and like masks weren't even mandatory. And so when we shut down, we knew this was going to be a long-term thing. We said, there's nothing that kills an event like canceling for an entire year. So what are we going to do about 2021? Because this pandemic is not going to go away. So we realized that like the one thing we could do in 2021 was serve as a scaled down event where we allowed the people in our industry who depend on government face-to-face meetings because of security or whatever reason, they need to meet and update with their military customers. Like, let's at least provide that service for them where they can meet, catch up on the face-to-face. And we kept pushing back and trying to find a window where we're going to get a lull in cases where it's relatively safe, where we could not be a super spreader event, where we could, do all the distancing rules, make masks mandatory. I don't remember. I do. Yeah. Was there a vaccine out? Yeah. I think the vaccine was out by that time. Was it? Because I remember getting a vaccine in March of 21.
It was out, but it was still like the US border was closed.
Mm-hmm.
So it was still difficult for a lot of people, even if they were vaccinated, to come.
Yeah.
Mm.
So, like we were confident enough to say we can at least provide this service, and in this kind of hybrid live and streaming format. And thankfully we were able to do it. We got this perfect window, and then we had 6 months to do it again at Satellite 2022. And which was like, if Satellite 2022 doesn't work, then it's going to be tough. But like the 22 show was a huge surprise because there were still people from the international community who couldn't come because of travel restrictions, but our US audience grew so much. Like we were like, wow, we did really, really well with the local audience, and that sustained us for when everybody came back at 23. We had this huge year where we broke our attendance record, and which is what we would have done in 21 if we had not had the pandemic. Like there was that business that was waiting to happen. So we were very fortunate because our show just naturally hit the times of the year where the cases were low enough that we felt comfortable moving forward with the show. And I'm grateful that the other shows in our industry that are very important, that didn't always have that luck, made it through. And like shows like Space Symposium, which are very important, they're supported by organizations, as like, and nonprofits, right? So I'm glad that the infrastructure of major space tech shows has survived. We haven't lost a huge show, and I think that's a huge plus for the industry, because it takes time to build a show into a fertile ground for business. It really does.
100%. And the satellite industry has never been sort of more relevant, really. I don't know if this is just anecdotally, but I feel like members of the public have a bit more of an understanding about how important satellites are in our society. The fact that their phone, is connected and the GPS all works off satellites and that sort of thing. Have you found that? And how does satellite and the industry communicate the significance of satellites to the general public? Is that something you feel a responsibility for as the event organizers, or is it more the sort of customers, I guess, the companies that are doing that?
This is a great question because there's been a major shift in how the satellite industry approaches educating the general public about what it does. And I have to go back when I first got into this industry because I remember what it was like back then. I came from the sustainability city planning and architecture world. I was an editor for a magazine in Philadelphia, and I made the jump into the satellite industry not knowing really anything about it. The only thing I knew about it was my dad had a satellite dish in the backyard so he could watch baseball games on the West Coast that weren't broadcast on the East Coast. He was a huge baseball fan, in addition to being in the music industry. And when I jumped in, it was very heavily like the clientele was broadcast industry because it was all live broadcast feeds, and everybody was an engineer on the broadcast side, on the sales side, at the executive level. Everyone was an engineer, and they all talked, or they were working with the government. Everyone talks in acronyms. Everyone has lingo, and it is very dense and intimidating. And also, everybody the industry was very old, age-wise. I mean, because a lot of people had been in the industry since the golden days of NASA. A lot of people had been in the industry since the 70s, when there was like a growth in broadcast, satellite broadcast events. And the average age of a person in the industry was like 56. And here I am, 28. I have no idea what's going on. And there are like a handful of people my age. But there was no need to educate the general public, because the general public's not buying, a $200 million satellite. Fox Networks is. The public just wants to see the live event that's being broadcast. And then when the broadcast industry shifted away from being, the main satellite customer, and satellites transitioned from a broadcast heavy industry to an internet service heavy industry, a data service, we saw this moment where satellite companies and operators had to talk to different types of companies, but they were using the same lingo, like talking about bandwidth as a resource, talking about megabits per second plans versus, trying to explain the technical difference between KU and KA bands, spot beams, and like they were naming products that would make sense to satellite engineers. But the customers were like, I don't know how any of that works. Why is this so expensive? And there was a bit of friction. And I think it hasn't been until recently where satellite operators and companies have finally figured out that like the customers don't really care about how the technology works. They don't even see it. It goes up into space. Like they don't care. They just want fast connectivity. That's it. They just want to go on Facebook. And I think satellite companies have accepted that and have taken on this like, okay, let's market ourselves no differently than how Verizon would. It's just you connect. That's it, right? It's very reliable. And that took a complete shift in executive culture. Like you'll notice the executives now, with the exception of one or two, they're all new. Like all the CEOs of operators have come from the terrestrial or cellular or consumer technology side. And the engineering part of it is much more internal. Satellite companies are talking like cellular companies are talking like any other tech company now. But that took a really long time because this is an industry that is founded by cutting edge engineering and physics. And I mean, it's incredible science. What satellites are based on incredible science. And it feels sad to say that it's hard to brag about what we can do from a scientific point of view. But, the companies have been much more successful in growing their customer base by treating satellites no different than any other enabled, connectivity enabled technology. I mean, satellites are now software defined. You can update and upgrade satellites through software. I mean, they're part of the software network. They're vulnerable to cyber attacks, just like everything else. So I'm glad we're at that point. And I was actually just talking to our marketing director, Isabel Burnham, about this earlier this year. Like, we're finally past the point where the satellite dish, the iconic satellite dish, it doesn't work anymore. Like, people don't know what that is. Like that round dish with the like little antenna pointing out of it, because not much looks like that anymore. Satellites are like little tiny boxes now, right? It's really funny. It was a great question because it has been a cultural shift that has taken quite some time.
So fascinating. Well, look, it's been so great to chat. I was just sort of wondering, to finish it off, what are your hopes and aspirations for the satellite conference this year? How do you see it continuing to shape the trajectory of satellites and the satellite industry for years to come? And also, I'm just kind of thinking, like, how much do you personally think about the future of satellites, like satellites on the moon, Mars, that kind of stuff?
Well, that is the development of the larger space economy, and I think that's something that our show will like work with other shows to promote. Like our satellite covers a portion of that economy. Space Symposium covers their all of the big shows, and now even the major tech shows are getting involved in that. But I'll start with satellite. When 30% or more of our audience are first time attendees, and our audience keeps growing, like I am prepared that this show is going to continue to grow for quite some time. Like I have nothing in front of me, no statistic that suggests that this industry is going to shrink. 10 years ago, I helped write the welcome letter in the program. And we said today on our conference welcomes 260 speakers representing more than 150 companies around the world. This year, it's 400 speakers representing more than 300 companies around the world. We have like a whole startup pavilion, a startup space, a competition, a 2-day young professional program that we produce in partnership with SGAC. There's just more new people coming every year, and then the industry veterans come, they return to this is part of the yearly cycle for them. So this show's going to keep getting bigger. I mean, we have to like grow our team because we have like 400 speakers to manage. I have like no idea how we're going to do this. Like 12 keynotes, general sessions, keynote luncheons. It is really just grown in scale significantly. So it's exciting, but it's also a challenge because like when we get to a certain size, now we're like rubbing up against events like CES, right? Where if we got all of these like industries coming to learn about these new IoT type technologies or satellite power technologies, we're taking out of other people's travel budgets, right? Like we're a stop now that a lot of people are going to have to make. It requires kind of a change in mentality. We also have to be a lot more like inclusive to other types of attendees from other industries. Like we have to think like, what is the person who knows nothing about satellite technology? How are they going to enjoy the show? Like we've got to create like a familiar environment for them.
Mm.
I think like, space is a very exciting, always optimistic industry to be involved with. And I'm very grateful that to be on this team. Like our team has been together. Most of our team's been together for 15 years. We all like started together, and we all have been working on the show for 15 years and probably going to be doing this for quite some time. And we just have to keep topping ourselves every year. And then your question about what's the hope for the moon and Mars and how we're growing the space economy. I'm gonna insert my personal opinion on this. I really hope that when we approach the development of space in a better way than we approached colonizing the world, I hope we take a step back and make sure we do it the right way in a way that we're not harming our own environment, or we're not doing things just for the sake of doing things. Like I don't want to see people lose their lives in space. Like I don't want us to just like take a risk in doing something without a purpose. I think it's okay to take our time. Like I think it's okay to say, just getting back to the moon is a huge challenge. Like it's huge. It's big. If it happens within our lifetime, like that's impressive. I can't believe how we did it in the 1960s. I mean, it's just, and people died in that process, right? Like it was a risk, but building out that infrastructure slowly in a sustainable way where we're not putting anything at risk is possible. And I think it takes the innovation of startups, but also the guidance of, I think we need government investment. I think like we need educated government leading the way, not just people who are like, oh, space is cool, I support that. No, like we need like detailed space policy. We need guidelines for space. And I think it needs to be a global effort. Like, I don't think it like, we can't go into space thinking this is just going to be the United States and no one else. It's not going to work. Like, the ISS is a tribute to our international approach to space. So I hope that we do a better job, and do it the right way. That's all I got to say on that. And I'm fine with taking our time. We're not going to Mars tomorrow. We're not. If we get to the moon in our lifetime, I'll be happy. If my son, you know what? I also want to say this. I think it's very possible that things like the James Webb Telescope or the NASA TESS program, like, it's very possible we discover life on another planet within our lifetime. Like, that's super exciting in itself. Like, the James Webb is like the greatest thing in the world right now. And so it's already exciting. Mars will be there. We'll get there. Let's just not like blow a hole in our atmosphere to get there.
No, that's a very well thought out answer, and I agree with you. Well, I know what your favourite satellite is because you just mentioned it with the James Webb. But look, thank you so much. Best of luck with the show. I will put details in the show notes if there are still tickets left or whatever. But thank you so much, and speak to you soon.
And before I go, Ben, can I just very quickly plug the work of my colleague Rachel Jewett? Ben's podcast, the Astroben podcast, is fantastic. The guests here are amazing. We do a very like satellite industry focused version of this. So if you want to learn more specifically about satellites, our senior managing editor, Rachel Jewett, is one of the smartest people in our industry, does a podcast On Orbit. And Ben, we'd love to have you on that podcast as a guest. We love talking to other creators and people like you. So sorry for the plug. I want to mention that
100%, and I'd love to come on, and I'll put details of that in the show notes as well. Thanks very much, Jeff.
Thanks, Ben.